Maddie is here tonight.
Twice in one day.
I'm pretty sure that Maddie said she could.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, the strangers don't get touched.
Yeah, that's pretty.
Camera's right up there.
Yeah, of course you got.
Yeah. I don't want to.
There's just a big trouble with that one.
Did you see?
Hey, Bill.
See all the documents?
Now they're seeing. So Bill, they never got their, they never got your voice message.
I'm sorry. Why would, if they never got the message?
Right?
Yeah.
I'm like, I was telling Bernie, this is insane.
I bet I could get a copy of it.
No, I just said it. You're done.
You're done.
Yeah.
Did you, and you didn't have any problem with saying it?
No, I was.
It was already done.
It was already done. The road was paved ahead of me, so.
So I was on a trailer, but it took all day.
Yeah, what we should be doing is we should be going through findings of fact to determine. If it's appropriate to rescind. So, yeah, basically, it's kind of laid out where theoretically, you don't pass. But don't necessarily respond. I think it's appropriate, but not at all.
Was it ever?
Well, yeah, years ago, it was, you know, we were pretty free and pretty.
Yes, yeah, he just, I think. Well.
No. I mean, we've got walls, we've got some windows.
Even other Thursdays. Oh, yeah. And we do have some.
It's not. Over time. You know, there's, they are really. I have the guest house, second guest house, and those people are yelling. So they, and then my foreman was in the hospital, and then, they're doing something in Indian. So they are spread out. All over the place. And then people from Washington.
I didn't run three.
And I'm like, I'm a local and I got it, so I take care of my mom next door. You've seen her in her sister. Wow. I would, so going out, state between Quick and Middle is the house going. And my mom's practice at the top, Hodges. Well, we talked to. That was short-lived. Yeah.
They've had enough. You need to get this guy. Ready?
Yeah.
Who's the supervisor in West Travis? Bob Sanford?
West Travis is Jim Barton.
Jim Martin.
Jim Barton, JB.
JB. Oh, JB. Okay.
Your client is in trouble with us. That's a shithole they're living in, that they've got going out there. It's unsightly, it's unfinished. I don't know over the phone. JB, should rock their world.
All right, I'll call this meeting to order. Can we do a feedback?
Quick sound thing you gotta adjust here. Thank you for your patience.
Should be good.
All right,
Roll call, please.
absolutely. Kim Morris,
Here.
Kristen McDonald,
Here.
Stu Stewart,
Here.
John Leo. Here. Bob Toma. Here. Maddie Hines is absent. Kathy Macho.
Here.
We have a quorum. We do have to make a decision though, since Maddie Hines is absent. One of the alternates will fill in as an active role. Both the alternates are encouraged to participate in discussion, but only one of them will be able to vote, and we should decide that now.
Who has a coin?
I don't.
Would
All right,
one of
I'm
you
thinking-
prefer to jump on? I mean.
We have one that was pointed at the same time.
I don't know if unless you've been here more than I have,
I haven't. We're equally new,
I'm
so.
thinking of a number between 1 and 10, whoever's the closest.
oh. 8.
It was 7. So.
All right.
Does that mean I win or I lose?
That's how you look at it. So I guess Kathy, you'll participate in the voting. Sue, you're still, of course, welcome to participate in conversation and discussion.
Okay, can I get a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved. I'll second.
Okay, motion, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay, the minutes are approved. So are we going into public comments and correspondence now?
Yeah, we'll open up the public hearing for the dimensional variance for 588 East Main.
Okay. The purpose of this hearing is to hear a variance request from Mark and Nancy Rondell for the property located at 588 East Main Street within the R2 zoning district. They're requesting a variance to construct an accessory structure with guest quarters. The proposed structure would be 1,056 square feet in size, about 115% of the size of the principal building. And we can open that up to, Mark, did you want to, Mark or Nancy, do you both want to do a presentation for us?
Okay, well, I can give a.
Or did you want to start to pave the way and then have
Sure,
them do
I
their
can do that.
presentation?
So if you would pull up this portion. The topic of discussion tonight is Mark and Nancy Rondell have submitted an application for to put up a carriage house or a accessory building with guest quarters in it. This will also, pending the outcome of tonight's meeting, guest quarters are also required to go through special land use approval with the Planning Commission. We just need to do this step first to know that they have, whatnot. What we're looking at, and the reason that we're here at the Zoning Board of Appeals is due to the size of the structure. We have language in the zoning code that states that accessory structures are accessory to the principal building. And as such, they should not exceed a certain size comparison to the principal building. The language in the zoning code states that a property can have up to 2 accessory dwellings, and that between those two, they shall not exceed 75% of the principal building's size. We do have a caveat or a way to go around that. If your property exceeds a certain size, then you can apply for special land use to have more square footage or more accessory dwellings. And that was something that we added to the zoning code, I want to say about 4 years ago, approximately. Does that sound right, John?
All right,
I think you were. So there is a method if your property is large enough to bypass that 75% or 2 building limit. They have a 915 square foot residential home towards the front of the property. Based on that, that would limit the size of any potential accessory building to approximately 686 square feet, which would be 75% of that. They do have 2 accessory buildings on the property now. They have indicated on their site plan that through this process, they would remove those buildings when putting in the potential new accessory building. The main issue is, of course, the comparison of the size of the new building going in. So with that lead in, Mark, Nancy, if you guys would like to explain reason why you'd like to do this and what your practical difficulty is.
All right, I'll try and summarize as quickly as I can, so I stand up.
Whatever you're comfortable with.
Well, if you're happy, I'm happy too. As most of you know, we also own other properties on the corner here. We currently live right across the street on 181 Zoll. This all started somewhat over a year ago when we started looking at what's happening around the Harbor Springs market and thinking about the possibility of selling. And our kids approached us and asked if we might be interested in selling one of our properties to them. And that gave us an opportunity to think of what we might do with 588 Main. And so we started thinking about rebuilding the principal residence on 588 Main. And we worked with that, as you're probably aware, these Main Street lots are pretty difficult properties to work with because of the angle that Main Street makes to the physical layout of the properties, both north and south. It cuts diagonally across the front of the property. So you're left with a, sorry. Oh, that's my fault. Sorry. So we're left with a decision as to whether we align the houses to Main Street or whether we align the houses to the sidelines of the property. If you align houses to the sidelines of the property, the setbacks become a significant issue in the design. Well, if you align them to Main Street, they become a significant issue. If you align them to the property, you can build an easier sort of structure. So we've been working with that on the main design for principal residence. And we came up with a design that we like. But as things have changed over the last 8 or 10 months in the construction world around here, we thought that, that's better. We thought that we would like to proceed forward with the accessory building that we would also like to build on the property as similar to what a lot of the neighboring properties have had built. So we went forward and designed an accessory building that would be in proportion to principal residence that we were planning. However, we come to find out that the existing principal residence, if we were to fix that up and use that, and this evolved after a number of conversations with Jeff, that the 75% rule came up. So thinking about that, it came under discussion that if we were to make an addition to the existing principal dwelling, and expand the footprint of that dwelling, then we would be able to comply with the 75%, even given the accessory building that we're proposing. However, our intention in the long run is not to keep the existing principal dwelling. It is in fact one of the most inferior of all the Main Street buildings that we've owned. And we think that it should be replaced eventually. But it seems sort of excessive to add a square foot addition to that we intend to tear down in the future. And thinking it through, it doesn't really seem to us to be in the best interest of the community to build a structure that we intend to tear down in the future. And our plan is we would like to build the accessory building as proposed to you all tonight and fix up the principal dwelling as a habitation for us for some time. Bob, relative to your question, my father lives in the apartment that's attached to our current house at 181 Zoll. And as long as he's able, he would like to continue living there. And our kids, if they were to purchase that from us, would permit that. And so this would provide living space for him, down the road in the future. So that's our thought as far as what's going to happen with my thoughts. So anyway, that's our situation, and we just think that the idea of going through a big construction project to add an addition to the main house, which then would be approvable, and the accessory building is drawn, that it would be better just to have a variance to allow the accessory building to exist. Since we submitted the application, Jeff has informed us that there's also another restriction about height, that the accessory building cannot exceed the height of the principal dwelling. Well, the proposal shows an accessory building in excess of the height of the existing building. So we would have to design an addition to extend the height of the existing building as well as the size. So that's as we understand it at this point.
Okay, thank you. Anyone in the audience would like to speak at this time?
I'd like just to offer my support for their request for Nancy, Mark. I live next door at 582 East Main, and they've just been tremendous neighbors and have always helped me and my partner Israel with everything and anything that we've ever asked. So I want to see them create their property in the manner in which they would dream about. So I just wanted to offer my wholehearted support for Mark and Nancy.
Is there anyone else?
I just like to say, looking forward, because this is going to set a precedent. If my house is 4,000 feet on 2nd Street, out of the lot next door, I want to make sure that if they get this, I can build a 5,000 square foot accessory building. Just want that on the record. Thank you.
You can't do that. Every situation and every request is different.
Well, okay, but this is a precedent. I agree about it.
You're asking for blanket, and that's not gonna happen.
I'm not asking for permission. I just want it on the record. That's something I wanted to.
Yes, sir.
got something here to read, and I'll give it to you guys, a copy of each of you for a matter of record.
Could you please state your name for the record?
For a second.
Oh, okay, sorry.
My name is Dave Holt. And my wife Valerie and I live at 598 East Main Street. It's the corner house on Main and Zoll. We're here this evening to voice our opinion on opposing the requested variance that violates the allowable size to construct an accessory building on 588 East Main Street. Like has been said, the proposed accessory structure foundation is 1,056 square feet, which is 115% the size of the principal building, and the guest quarters upstairs is an additional 176 feet larger due to a 4-foot overhang or bump out the length of the structure, bringing the total size of the guest quarters to 1,232 square feet, or 134% of the size of the principal building. According to the zoning administrator, the allowable size of the accessory building is 686 square feet, which is 75% of the, as stated, 915 square foot principal building. We are not opposed to an accessory structure in guest quarters, not to exceed 686 square feet. As the Rondell stated in section E of their proposal, the property owners to the west, Ty and Israel, recently constructed a garage guest quarters. What wasn't mentioned in the proposal is that their garage and guest quarters is within the zoning code 75% of principal property. However, there are alternatives, and Mark touched on this. As Rondell stated in section H of their proposal, their preferred option, again, preferred option, is to remove the current principal residence and build a new, larger principal dwelling and the associated accessory building that would fall into the 75% size requirement. We agree with this approach and are sure that there's an abundance of builders in Emmett and the surrounding counties that can easily accomplish this project. After all, if the Rondells can find a builder to construct the accessory building and guest quarters, they can surely find a builder for the new and larger principal dwelling and the associated code compliant accessory building. This is not a practical difficulty. It's a difference in priority, especially when they stated what their preferred option was. Another alternative the Rondells stated, Mark mentioned tonight, in section H of their proposal, was to add an addition onto the current primary residence to make it large enough to accomplish their goal of the requested size of this accessory building. While this is definitely doable, my recent experience with renovations is that in the long run, they are more expensive due to time and material costs versus a quoted price project. Nonetheless, it's an alternative the Rondells could consider. But to just put it on an addition and then turn the entire residence down later, just to accomplish the requested accessory building size, is just not, in our opinion, rational or cost effective. In summary, again, we are not opposed to the accessory building guest quarters, so long as it is within the allowable size as defined by the zoning administrator. Yeah, okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Is there anyone else that would like to speak? Anyone? I'm gonna shut down the public comments then, and we'll talk amongst ourselves here.
Is there anybody on the
No, there's one person.
Okay. John, would you like to start us out on?
I've got a question for Jeff. Our code says, our ordinances say 75% of the principal building. Physical, what's the intent of that limitation?
I think the intent is, and again, this is just kind of my assumption based on my experience here in the last couple of years. But I think the primary intent is that the principal building should be the foremost building on the property. And if you have accessory structures that become larger than the principal building, they kind of take over the status or have the potential to take over the status of the property and change the atmosphere of the community. And I think this is something we had in the zoning code for a while, and it's come up before for discussion, and we chose to keep that in place.
I have questions about that. Is it okay to ask questions?
Yeah, absolutely,
Okay.
yes.
So if what they wanted to do on this property was build a primary residence at the south end of the lot and then a secondary residence next to the street, would the one at the south of the lot need to be smaller than the one on the street? I mean, how are we defining what's accessory and what's primary?
Well, we have a couple of different portions of the code that would come into play here. One is that the principal building should be the larger of the buildings. We also have language that states that accessory buildings shall be in a side yard or a rear yard. They're not permitted to be in a front yard in front of the home. We do have some situations where that can happen. Primarily, it's where we have through lots where the property would go between two streets, such as we have on Pine and Bluff. We also have some situations with properties that are on the water where our code says that the front of a home is the street side. But in reality, I think properties that are on waterfront, they really look at their property as the water side is the more of the front. So they would prefer to have the buildings, and we have language for those that talk about that it can be done in a front yard in those situations through special land use approval with the planning commission.
Okay, so the front building needs to be the bigger one. That's the way that's kind of done. And then in terms of sequence, if it were a brand new lot and they were just starting to build on it, would they be required to build the primary residence first and the accessory building second, or can the builder sequence it the opposite way?
I think actually the best thing that I can provide in this situation is the history that we've had recently with the planning commission a couple of years ago with Ty and Israel's home. They came to me for discussion. Actually, your architect, your builder, Dan Gorman, with the idea of building their accessory structure with guest quarters above. Initially, to my knowledge, they had not planned on building an addition. But when Dan presented the size of the proposed accessory structure through discussion in the 75% rule, they determined that they needed to build an addition onto the home to make that happen. So when they went to the planning commission for discussion, the planning commission through their special land use approval of the project, put a condition in place that the addition would have to be started and get to a certain percentage of completion before the start of the accessory structure could be progressed on.
That's okay. So that's the renovation scenario. What about brand new? Or if they took everything off that lot and started without anything on the lot, are they required to build the front building first, the back building second?
Based on the conversation that the planning commission had, I believe that they would more than likely put in place some type of a condition that they would have to start on the primary residence first and get to a certain portion of completion before they could start on the accessory structure building.
Is there some reason for that? I don't get it.
I think it's to avoid a situation where the accessory building is built and completed and then the primary building is never started.
So it's a trust issue.
Well, I think
Or
partially, yeah.
setting conditions to be sure that eventually it looks the way it's supposed to look with the bigger one and the smaller one. Okay,
I think it's a really, really good question. But I think I would phrase it a little bit different. It's not a matter of trust. It's a matter of making sure that the city ends up with
yes,
the look and feel that you want and not end up with a, just kidding. Now you
yes,
have a huge yard and an accessory building.
yeah, that makes sense. So part of the issue is, yeah. Okay, thank you.
The site plan, Jeff, I see some shaded area here in the middle.
Yep.
What is that? Is that?
No, good point. So that shaded area is the building envelope for the principal building. So we have a front yard setback, side yard setbacks, rear yard setbacks. And when Benchmark put this together, they drew on here the setbacks for the principal building. So we can see in looking at the principal residence, the home, the 915 square feet building in the front, there are portions of that that are closer to the street that don't comply. That's an existing nonconformity. That home is 80 or 100 years old or something like that. It was built before we had those regulations. So they're permitted to keep that and maintain that, or even replace it to the limited extent that it currently exists without any special approval. Because it's there and they can maintain it. If they were to expand that home in any way, or tear that home down and replace it with a new home, it would be best then if they would keep it within that shaded area that indicates the buildable area of the property for new construction.
So this accessory building is not within the shaded area, but it's within the limits of what an accessory needs to be.
Yes, and because the benchmark showed the setbacks for the principal building, the setbacks for an accessory building are different. Accessory buildings are permitted primarily with the rear yard setback, they're permitted to be much closer to the property line. So there aren't any issues with the placement and location of the building. The only real issue at stake here for discussion is the size in comparison with the home in front, and then the difference in height that was pointed out. And we did include in the packet, there's the one that shows the different height. That is the outline that's on screen there of the principal building in front. So we can see that is 22 feet 6 inches, and the proposed building is 25, which is the limitation for an accessory structure. Maximum height for a principal building is 35 feet.
What is the side yard setback for the auxiliary or the accessory buildings? Is that?
I think it's noted on there. They do have the setbacks for the accessory building noted on here. Side yard setback is 10, rear yard setback is 10.
So this little one that's at 292 is actually non-conforming
As is the current.
as it currently
Yes.
is.
Yes.
Okay,
Existing nonconformity, but yeah.
right, okay. And then Jeff, when you were talking before Mark spoke about the size of the lot, does this lot does that fall into the category that you were talking about, that if a lot was a larger lot, what were you saying about the square footage on the lot? That
Going based on memory here. When we reviewed this and created the special land use option to have a larger accessory building or more accessory buildings, I can't remember. I think it was that your lot size had to be something like maybe 2 acres or larger. There was some size. I would have to look that up to be certain. But that is noted in the.
It was
in the zoning
over an
code.
acre, but I don't
Is it over an acre?
remember where we drew the line, but it was over
Yeah.
an acre.
Yeah, but the idea was, and when we did that, we looked at the sizes of lots throughout the community and how many were over certain sizes. Because that was a good topic of discussion of how many times would we like to see something like that happen within the community. And I know we wanted to keep it to a minimum, because when you have potentially a third accessory building or a larger accessory building, and I think the idea with maintaining and doing it on sites that had larger property available, that those extra or larger buildings could be set back much farther and be out of view. So it wouldn't feel like there was such a large building being put on a piece of property in that situation.
Yeah, but this size lot would not, wouldn't have. triggered.
yeah. Hardly any of them in Harbor Wood, really.
There
I mean,
are-
maybe
I
a
think
dozen.
there
At
were
the
maybe a
time-
dozen, give or take.
Well, there were 8.
Well, there was an 8. I know it was minimal. Yeah.
It was 8.
Okay, Kathy, do you have any thoughts from your?
I have a lot, but I'm
Okay.
not sure what I should be bringing up. Were these restrictions in effect when the property was purchased by the Rondells, or does that matter?
I don't know. I guess I can't say for certain when we created our guest quarters rules and regulations.
Okay.
And I wouldn't know when we did that in comparison to when Mark and Nancy have owned these properties. I know that Mark and Nancy have been in town for a while.
Mhm.
I can't,
But 1980.
yeah, And I can't say for certain when these rules came into play,
Okay.
The rules for accessory buildings.
the rules for accessory buildings, right?
Bob, thoughts on your end here?
No. I'm not seeing. No, I don't see any problem with it. It's back. It's in a place that that until today I didn't know existed, and I've been here 30 years. And I work around the corner. I had no idea that was all back in there.
Kim?
I don't have any further comments right now than what I asked Joe, so.
Okay. John?
I'm torn, and the reason that I asked Jeff, the intent behind the 75%, knowing what it was, is that you don't want accessory building or buildings to overtake the property, and I get that. In this case, I don't think that that would happen. So we have a situation where someone wants to spend money to improve the property so that they can use and benefit from their ownership of the property, sell a piece of property to their family, remodel or replace the building in front. I haven't heard anybody object to the fact that there's going to be an accessory building. In fact, people have said, I'm absolutely not opposed to an accessory building, just not more than 75%. And that's what I struggle with, because I think that feels very arbitrary. It's not what the 75% is rigidly, it's what does it look like when you're done? Where is it going to be? How is it going to improve the property? How is it going to affect the neighbors? I haven't heard anything about it being a negative to any of the neighbors. And it's consistent, I think, with a lot of the improvements that are going on in town. So the one, I mean, there's a second one, there's a height, we're talking about 3 feet.
2.5.
2.5 feet. So that would kind of fall in the same category. I don't have a problem with this. I think it's a way for them to benefit from and enjoy the use of their property, and there's no negative impact on the community whatsoever.
So when we're talking about neighborhood that's impacted negatively or positively, how far out does that expand? I mean, is that just houses on, within, I don't know, a couple blocks on either side, or across the street, or a block over, or 5 blocks down?
Well, the code is intended, if I may, the code is intended to maintain a look and feel and perspective for the city.
Okay.
That's my interpretation when I look at these issues. How is this going to affect the neighbors immediately next door and down the block? And as you drive into town, when visitors come into town, how's it going to look? How's it going to feel? If they were proposing, a pole barn in the back, might have a different perspective. That's not what they're proposing. But in my opinion, that's the intention.
I don't know that that should be the focus of our discussion today, though. I understand that it's important to the discussion at some point in time. But when the Planning Commission reviews the special land use criteria, that's really the focus of what they're looking at with those 7 standards, is the potential impact to neighboring properties. I think the core factor that we should be looking at is practical difficulty and reasonable alternatives, things along that lines that are outlined in our findings of fact document.
Well, and also for our alternates that are new, we have these discussions. We would love to hear input before we move on to vote. So we're kind of polling everyone, taking everyone's pulse on how they feel about and kind of working through it together, so that we kind of know where we stand when we go to vote. So that's kind of important to keep asking questions, and I think also, when we do look at it, it is about what is typical for the neighborhood. What is typical on that side of Main Street is having apartments. It's R2 zoning. So apartments are very normal on that side of Main, not on the other side. So from this edge all the way down to the Denver property is zoned that way. And then you kind of look at maybe the old McDonald house, which is now the Reisners, that back up to the yachts, kind of storage back there. They have a very big accessory building, but it's way in the back. And so when you're looking at what it looks like in the neighborhood, you know, this is sitting more than 100 feet back from Main Street. So I think that makes a big difference. If we're talking about an accessory building, you know, right, you know, not back against that back property line, you're talking about a lot more mass halfway or, you know, further into the lot.
Okay.
And mass is important too. It is about the visual when you start looking
Well,
at that.
and I guess my concern isn't what their end result is. The question is, if you allow the accessory building to be done first, I don't know how the city can ask for any guarantee that the other house is going to be built within a reasonable period of time. And what's reasonable? I'm not.
Well, and just to clarify, they're asking for a variance request to approve the building.
Right,
If the building is approved with a variance,
right.
there is no requirement that they
Right.
increase the size of the
Okay,
existing home.
Okay,
Right.
okay.
I sometimes feel that
I,
when we do these 6 steps or 7 steps
Mhm.
on paper, that you've thrown common sense and out the window. And if we're going to continue to do this, okay, if one of these fails, we're done. Well, at that point, I don't know why we have a committee. We might as well just let Victor do this when they come in, and Victor can say, well, you didn't pass number 6, you're done.
But that's what this is for. This document is for your review so that you as a panel can make these determinations as opposed to staff. Right,
And
but
I get that point, Bob. Then that requires then, if we want to change the zoning code, then we change the zoning code. We go to council and planning commission and change the zoning code, but we have the zoning code to work with as is, and these steps reflect what the zoning code is. So that's, again, it might not be common sense, but then that goes to planning commission and say, hey, zoning code doesn't make sense.
That being said, and okay, I get it, but that still ends up that if you fail one of these 6 things, you are done.
well, I'm not saying that is, but I think these
Well, that's
are
how- that's
reasonable
where
things to look at. Exactly, and I'm not
Yes.
certainly not saying that because I see there might be one or more
No,
that don't qualify, that it throws it out, you know, throws the request out the window. I'm not indicating that. I'm just looking at it and trying to understand what the ramifications are of approving this. And then we don't know what's going to happen next. You know, is there ever going to be a newer, bigger house? I don't know. And does that matter? That's my question.
Why do you have a zoning code if you're not gonna enforce it? Why not have a zoning idea?
Hold on, we're, Jeff, I'm sorry, I gotta shut you down. We gotta
Not
keep
Tourette's,
on.
I'm sorry.
That's all right. You know, when I look at this proposal, I put my real estate hat on and I say to myself, we need affordable housing desperately here. We need these kinds of projects that is going to put someone in this year round that needs a rental or needs a place to stay. And that, you know, when I've been talking to people around town that are desperate for a place to live and they're commuting from Sheboygan and Gaylord and all over the place because they can't find any place to live locally, this is a huge, huge problem. So when I look at this, I think I've known the Rondells my whole life, and they have always rented out their places to local people. And so for me, I mean, if this proposal was smack dab in the middle of this lot and it was just gonna be this monstrous thing, I don't think we're gonna see it back here. I really don't, and I see no problem with where it's located. They have so much vacant land back here with the greenhouse that they also own. And I understand that, just like Bob is saying, it's common sense that they don't add on to the mass of their house that is in pretty bad shape. I was in there 30 years ago and it was shaky. I know, but it's suited you, and it's been great for everybody that I know that has had to rent that place. And I had many friends that did at a reasonable cost. So for me, I don't think that this is, I think it's unreasonable to have them build to then tear it down when they do have the ability. And as far as having builders in the area, I'm building a house and I had to go 2 hours away to find a builder that I could afford. And I'm in the process of doing it. It's taken 9 months. I'm not even close. But I just want to say that finding a builder is not as easy as it would appear to be. Yes, sir, you can comment on
I
that.
have friends that have bills all the way down to Gaylord. They don't have a problem, as long as you go through the bidding. But I have one question, something you asked that I could ask. Jeff, to you.
I just have to interject. The public comment section is over.
Yeah.
Unless you want to reopen it.
Well, I just didn't want to, I wasn't.
You said that they can rent it. Are auxiliary buildings rentable?
No, they are not. Accessory buildings with guest quarters cannot be rented and cannot be occupied long-term.
I thought they could be if they were in the R2,
No,
the multifamily district.
no, they cannot.
I have another question.
Yes.
Back to Bob's point about the common sense and what we're stepping through and what we were about to launch John into doing. At some point in those, there is judgment for us. I mean, I think the reason it's not a staff call is because we're allowed to say there are circumstances here that make it difficult for these folks to follow, and those aren't self-created circumstances. And I guess to that point, that's the one thing I'm not exactly clear on is what the circumstance is that keeps this from working. Build the primary first and the accessory second. That's the one piece I'm not clear about.
Well, Dave, is that your name? Yes, Dave? I understand what you're saying, and tell me if I'm wrong. You're not against this project, but you're against this project because it doesn't specifically follow the law.
That's right.
Okay, so
I have one other question.
basically,
Go along with that, if I could, along the same line, this might help everybody. Is there a code, Jeff, as to how much overhang you can have on the foundation of floor?
That's not really something that we get into zoning wise. I think that would fall under more of like a building code thing that Emmett County would govern of how much.
Well,
I think it's called like cantilevering.
Yeah, this to Mark and Nancy, this might be the answer. Okay, you keep that foundation at 686, put your overhang where you get the footage you want to have the living space, and problem solved, we can all go home. Because it is 686. It falls within 75%. If you're not gonna measure the upstairs at your square footage, done deal.
I just
to me,
clarify.
to me,
Yeah.
to vote against this strictly because it doesn't satisfy the law is it's akin to you getting stopped by a cop tonight for speeding. And the cop says, you've been speeding. And you say, yes, but my wife is sick and I'm trying to take her to the hospital. And the cop says, I don't really care. The law is the law. You're going to get a ticket and we're going to sit here on the side of the road. I don't care about your wife. You're asking for common sense and I'm not giving you that. I'm giving you the law.
But there's a reasonable alternative is all.
If I can just kind of maybe slow things down a little bit here, let me just briefly state something. So the purpose of the zoning board of appeals is for situations when an applicant feels that the rules and regulations don't work for a situation with their property. That they feel that they've identified some flaw of the property itself that is preventing them from doing something that other property owners in the area have had the reasonable use to do. And they're presenting their practical difficulty of why they can't comply with the rules and regulations to achieve that same result. The purpose of the findings of fact document, Jim Raymer was kind enough to go through various court of appeals and court decisions where the local municipality zoning board of appeals was overruled. And these were the categories that if the zoning board didn't clearly identify that these items had been achieved, were situations where other courts overruled or kicked back the decision to the zoning board to hear again. And so that's kind of why we review. I look at it as kind of a three-part thing. The courts have kind of broken it down into these 6 parts that identify the criteria of what the applicant needs to overcome in order to go beyond the rules that obviously can't apply to 100% of properties. There's always going to be situations that our general rules and regulations of the zoning code can't take into consideration. And it's up to you to listen to the applicant, hear what their arguments are for practical difficulty, hear what the potential ideas are for reasonable alternatives to the project, and based on these findings of fact, come to a decision. You're right. Obviously there are situations where, even though you want to obey the law, sometimes you need to speed for whatever reason you come up with, right? And that's basically what this is for, is here's the criteria that the community has arrived at of where it's okay to speed. So please use this document in coming up with your reason for why you feel that a variance is appropriate or a variance is not appropriate, because that provides us the core that we can follow to make sure that whatever decision you arrive at, if it is appealed, is defensible. That makes sense. So I would encourage at this point, you've heard lots of commentary. My recommendation would be go through each of these items, discuss each one to determine whether you feel that a variance is appropriate. And once you've gone through and discussed each of the 6, make a motion to approve or deny. You can, of course, ask further questions of staff, of the public, of the applicant in the course of arriving at your decision.
All right, we'll roll with that. Based on the following evidence, which is part of the record, the board finds that there are or are not unique characteristics of the subject land and not to generalize or not to general characteristics of the surrounding areas.
I don't think there are not. I don't think there's anything unique about the land.
Yeah, I'm gonna go with are not. Might want to get everybody's opinion on that one.
Well, no, if the question is specifically about the lot, the issue is not related to the lot.
Right, exactly. Right.
Okay, based on the following evidence, which is part of the record, the board finds or does not find the strict application of the zoning code to the applicant's property would be unfair and produce an unjust result because.
What did we just, excuse me,
Because
what
I
did we
don't see-
decide on number 1? Did we decide are or are not?
Or not.
There is none.
Are not?
There's nothing unique about the
There's
property.
nothing
Okay, then
unique
it
about the
says-
land.
Says go to number 7.
Go to number 7. Yeah.
Right, no, this basically, as I read this, is set up so that if you turn any one of these down, then you deny it. And
That's
But
correct.
as I understood it when I discussed with Jeff, that's not the intention necessarily, is to go through and consider all of these.
Yes, that's kind of how I
Yeah.
run the meeting is we're gonna go through and look at each one of these and see, and then we can circle back around, if we need to. So, so do we think that this would be an unfair result? If we were strict with the zoning code? I believe it would be.
I believe it would be.
I believe it would be unfair.
Unfair is, I don't know.
There are a lot of relative terms here.
Yeah, that's a pretty relative term.
It's, that I think, not that you asked me, I'm sorry, but
No, go
I
ahead.
think what's difficult is that from a personal standpoint, for the people involved and for the family and what they're trying to do, the zoning makes a hash of it. It should be possible to let them do what they're doing. It's just that all of this hinges on the land and the property, and we don't get to separate the family situation from the land situation. It's the land situation that has to dominate from the
But
side.
that's why we go through all of them and then circle back.
And that one about being unfair, it's unfair with regard to what? With regard to how the property is treated or how the people are treated? And I guess if it's about the property, then no, I don't think it's unfair.
I think from my understanding, it's about, does it create an unfair result to what the applicant can do with the
Correct.
property? So it's kind of a little bit
To
of
the
both in a
applicant.
way, in a way. So
I
it's
think.
Great, it's muddy, thank you.
I think that this is really talking about, we're getting into the portion of this where we're talking about reasonable use. And when we're talking about if it's unfair, an example would be, let's say that the property owner is asking for a front porch. And let's say that the typical property owner in that neighborhood has a front porch that sticks out 10 feet from the home. And for whatever reason, the applicant's only has room for a 4-foot front porch. That would be unfair because we're talking about the reasonable use in comparison with the neighbors. That the zoning code would limit them to having a 4-foot front porch where other property owners are able to have 10. So that's, I think, what that's really talking about.
So is it reasonable use of the property to have an accessory building?
See that, but I think that the use of the property that they're proposing is very reasonable to house the family and keep, I mean. I don't
So
have-
denying it would be unfair
Yeah, from that perspective, yes.
from that perspective. Okay.
Yes.
Well, and accessory buildings, and the bottom level will be a garage, correct?
That's the intention.
Okay, so garages are normal. The two, accessory buildings that are currently there would be removed. And garages are normal for the area as well as carriage houses. So I do think that, everyone needs a garage. Everyone needs, if they've got the property to put it on, I think that does make it unfair to not allow them to build this. As far as a garage accessory. Okay, so let's go to number 3. Based on the following evidence, which is part of the record, the board finds or does not find that strict compliance with the zoning code restrictions would prevent the owner from using the property for a permitted use or would render conformity with the zoning code's restrictions unnecessarily burdensome. Was that awkward? A little bit.
It's
a little awkward.
It is awkward.
So it would so the strict compliance with the zoning code restrictions would permit the owner from using the property for a permitted purpose or would render conformity with the zoning code's restrictions unnecessarily burdensome. So,
It's basically saying again, just like the previous one, it'd be following the zoning code would make it unfair. It's basically saying this in a different way.
It's kind of the same
In a
thing.
different way.
just
but-
enough, yeah. So I would say yes, because we said yes on 2. Based on the following evidence, which is part of the record, the board finds or does not find that there are no reasonable alternatives to granting a variance.
I think that there are reasonable alternatives. I mean, they've presented them themselves, so there are other alternatives.
Okay, let's go to
Which
5.
would, to build another addition on a house that,
The accessory building could be smaller. They could start with the house first and redo that, and then redo the accessory building after that. But
Mhm.
may not be able to afford that.
No.
It is our function to decide.
Is that-
Let's go to 5. Based on the following evidence, which is part of the record, the board finds that the variance could be granted without substantial injury to adjacent properties in the neighborhood in which the property is located. I think we can all agree that this is not going to be harming the direct neighbor, which is you, sir. And it backs up to their greenhouse lot. So I think we can safely say yes on that.
Could I just comment that the one thing I would add to that is that there's a fairness issue, that everybody has to do this. I mean, that if they get to do this in a different order with the accessory building first and the primary second, then why doesn't everybody else get to? So there's a perceived fairness issue there that's part of it, but it wouldn't change what you said. Sorry.
No, that's all right. It's okay. Number 6, based on the following evidence, the board finds that any practical difficulty was self-created. And I think we can all agree that this is pre-existing and they purchased this as is. Is that correct? With the garages and, I mean, the house was built 100 years ago, right? So I think we can safely say that this was not
It's not
self-created.
self-created.
All right, let's circle back around, gentlemen. Yes.
This particular piece of property, whatever it is, 24, 34, 44 by, I can't read. the word,
135.
By 135, was part of the greenhouse lot. Would it make a difference?
If this property was part of the greenhouse, if they were all one piece,
Yeah.
Still relates to the signs relative to the principal residence.
That's what I
There
was
is no
thinking.
principal residence. It was part of the greenhouse lot,
Oh, well, then you can't have an accessory building
Can't
on
have
a
a building.
property without a principal residence.
period,
You-
on a vacant lot.
if this was all a vacant piece of property,
Yeah.
the first building that needs to be built is the residence.
Well, what if they don't want, what if I don't want a residence? What if I just want to build a?
Then you get a vacant lot.
Okay, that's what this is, would be. That's what this would be.
No, I think.
You know what
well,
I'm saying?
But I was,
Do you understand what I'm saying?
The city of Harbor Springs at this time does not permit accessory buildings to be built without a residence on the property first.
well. Bob, you have a question for Mark?
I do, come here. This is a show and tell.
Okay.
Okay, if this gets out of hand, why don't you take this piece of property and add it to this piece?
First thing I see is we need another lot split. We've already been through that.
6 months, okay, all right, okay,
You know, this would have to get split off, right?
yes.
But the size of the accessory building is
6 months.
Still tied to the.
is
principal
tied to the size of the principal residence, not the size of the
residence.
lot.
No, he's proposing that it be on, we're down a rabbit
Wouldn't
hole.
even get us started with the lot split.
So let me,
But
Yeah, okay.
all right, thank you.
I'm not quite fine, but,
Okay.
okay.
So-
Let's see where we go.
But I am curious too, we're dealing with 2 different lots here, the greenhouse and the house, the main street. So if they were to move this accessory building behind the greenhouse, could they build a 2-car or 3-car garage with living quarters above as a main home? Could they do that? So that
The zoning code requires that a certain portion of the first floor must have living space on it. There are some homes that have sort of done something like that, where they have garage on the main floor with some living, and then they have more living above. But it would require living on the main floor.
And you don't have like an idea of how, what. the
I'd have to
square
go back and
footage
look
is?
at that because it doesn't happen very often. It's not very conducive to build in that way. We have, I think we have one property to my knowledge that has done something like that, and that's up on Arbor Street. Jack, what's Jack's last name?
Pierce.
Jack Pierce had the
Rest in peace.
house next to him that he owned for a while that he sold.
Yeah.
That was done like that, but there's the garage in front, and then there's living behind, and then there's living above.
Okay.
But it requires a certain percentage, and I'd have to do the math each time because it's kind of weird how it works out.
So in an R2 district, you can't have a storage building. No,
It can't be the only building on the property
because it's R2.
No.
because it's we don't permit that in any, the only place that you could have a building that on the property without having a residence is a commercial property in B1 or CBD. In any of the residential neighborhoods, you would have to have at least a single family home or a duplex before you could have an accessory structure.
Unless it's also non-conforming lot, like the structure was already up.
Unless it's a non-conforming lot.
Is the flower shop a residential, zoned residential, that building?
That building is zoned R2 like the rest of the buildings in this area.
It's grandfathered, yeah.
Oh, so that was.
That's why it's a business in our district.
Okay, okay. So greenhouse the same. Is that also?
Again, grandfathered in, it's, yeah. It's one of the few situations where we have
Got it,
a storage building without a principal building.
okay.
So did we wanna circle through a few more of these again and see what we can't figure out?
So.
Kathy, did you have something?
Well, I'm just looking at these again, based on number 4. Is there a reasonable alternative to granting a variance? Is the question. And so the alternatives are, as they've stated, to add to the main house or demolish and do the new main house first in a size large enough in order to justify the.
Oh, but that's reasonable for whom?
No, I, yeah. You're right.
Oh, he had his hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry.
There's a third option, I mentioned, I don't know if it wasn't clear enough. But if Mark and Nancy would build their foundation at 686, and the cantilever down all sides to get to 1232, it's a done deal. That goes to the loophole that is 75% if your foundation is your starting point. I don't know, Mark, what do you think of that?
My father belonged to a scout troop in Mansfield, Ohio.
The
They
scout
met in a blockhouse. That is basically what you're talking about. It has a tiny little footprint and cantilevers on all sides.
Mhm.
Is that sort of in character with the neighborhood down here? We're talking about highly subjective scenarios.
I think three potential reasonable alternatives have been presented tonight. It's up to you guys to determine whether they're reasonable or not. One is build an addition onto the existing residential home that's there so that they have enough square footage on the main building so that their proposed building would be at 75%. The second would be to remove the existing structure, existing home, build a new larger home that would make it so that their proposed building meets the 75% rule. The third one would be to build a smaller accessory building that would meet the 75% rule. And I think your decision should be whether or not those are reasonable alternatives or not.
Can I just say one thing? one of those alternatives to put the addition on the house, to bring it up to the size that justifies this accessory building. If we do that, then we don't need to come back and ask. Those are all administratively approved. We just don't feel it's reasonable to put an addition on. We don't feel it's reasonable to do it that way. But if we did do that way, then we can just do all this without asking. So,
Or in the best interest of the city, from
Right.
an environmental, from a construction, from a congestion,
yeah,
from
the whole
a
deal.
lots of different aspects, we feel that
It's not a reasonable alternative.
So from what I'm hearing from Nancy and Mark is that it's not reasonable to have to do more on your property to be able to do something that would
Something
be
that
less.
we
or-
could do in
That's,
that.
that's what they're
especially
arguing.
something that we're
Probably gonna
hoping
trash.
to tear down in the long run. We see that that is different from your situation, Ty, with you and Israel. You did not intend to demolish the existing house. And so that's how we see this as being distinct from your situation.
So that's,
You intended to keep the existing house.
so that's.
Okay, should we,
Yes.
I'd like to make a motion that we
Yes.
vote on this, and get it over with. That we vote to approve, the practical difficulty be that the reduction in size does not lend itself to the use that's intended for the building, and therefore makes the building certainly less useful than what the plan is, because it's smaller by a third. Anyway, so that's the motion. Vote to pass. Second.
based on the fact that after much discussion and much detail, in my mind, and I speak for myself, we're trying to find a way to check a box. No one has objected to an accessory building. No one objected actually even to the size of the proposed building. The only objection is that it does not meet the checkbox that it be 75% of the principal residence. I'm not for telling people how to enjoy their property and how they do it. And if that's grounds for appeals, then so be it, but I'll second.
Okay, can we, call a vote?
Yep, we have a motion, we have a second. We will roll call. And I believe we said Kathy was going to be the participating. Kathy,
Next time Sue can.
next time.
Three's my lucky number. I'm sticking with it.
We'll start with Kathy.
I have qualms, 'cause this is my first. I'll say yes.
Yes.
Tony. John Leo,
Yes.
Sue, oh, no, sorry, Sue, excuse me, Kristen McDonald,
Yes.
and Kim Morris.
No.
Sue, what would you have voted?
I don't know, because I can see.
Motion passed.
Motion passes.
I would like to seriously thank all of you for the effort and energy you put into this.
Yeah, that was our.
I like Budweiser.
I think we can adjourn.
If you'd said that before the vote, that would have been a quick pro quo. You would be in trouble.
Member comments, I don't know if anybody else has any. I did receive 2 applications for zoning variances for our next meeting, so we will have July ZBA. So do plan on attending that. I know, it's July. Other than that, I don't think I have anything
Second
else.
Wednesday?
It's the second Wednesday. I don't have my phone. What day does that fall on?
It's gonna be like the
13th.
13th? Okay. So please be available that day for 2 variance requests. And we'll send out
I
information.
look forward to it.
Sure you do. Anybody else have any member comments? I don't want.
Yes,
No.
Zoning code.
All right.
Second.
I'm gonna drink.